By the light of a small oil lamp, the room seems to breathe. Shadows shift across a mud-plastered wall. A bowl of water waits beside a folded strip of linen, a little cone of unguent, a reed pen, and a scrap of papyrus marked with black signs. The practitioner leans over the patient and begins to speak. A knot is tied, a figurine is touched, a charm is placed against the body. The words are not dramatic. They do not need to be. In this world, speech itself is an instrument. Gesture has weight. Materials remember what has been done to them. A body in danger can be defended not only with a remedy, but with a force thought to run through gods, kings, healers, and the hidden architecture of the cosmos itself. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. It is easy, from a great distance in time, to call this magic and imagine something irrational, secretive, or theatrical. The ancient Egyptians would have recognized only part of that picture. They certainly used spells, amulets, ritual gestures, spoken names, and charged objects. They certainly believed unseen beings could wound or protect. Yet what they were doing was not, in their own eyes, a departure from reality. It was an application of reality. The power behind such acts was called Heka, and to understand it requires setting aside many modern habits of thought. Heka is not merely a collection of tricks, charms, or occult curiosities. It is a capacity built into existence, a lawful and dangerous potency that can be directed, invoked, embodied, and sometimes personified. What survives in the record suggests that Egyptians saw it almost the way one might speak of light or breath, invisible by itself, but evident in its effects. That changes the atmosphere of the entire civilization. Temples, tombs, workshops, sick rooms, and household thresholds begin to look different once Heka is placed back into them. A carved image is no longer only an image. A written sign is no longer just a sign. A name is not simply a label attached to a being, but part of that being's operative essence. A spoken formula can protect, persuade, compel, revive, repel, or transform, depending on who speaks, how it is spoken, what materials accompany it, and what divine precedent stands behind it. The evidence remains incomplete, and much of it comes from priests, scribes, tomb assemblages, and rare conditions of preservation. Even so, enough survives to show a society that never drew a sharp boundary between sacred rite, practical healing, protective ritual, and the management of danger. Night, in particular, reveals that world with unusual clarity. Darkness in ancient Egypt is not empty. It is crowded with vulnerability. When the sun sets beyond the western horizon, that daily reassurance of order disappears, and the hours after sunset belong more obviously to uncertainty. Fever rises in the night. Pain feels worse in the night. Venomous creatures move in the night. Sleep opens the body and mind to strange pressure, dreams, spirits, and forms of exposure that daylight does not erase. It is no surprise that many protective practices seem most vivid in this dim zone between danger and relief. The little lamp flame, the recited words, the cool water poured over a text, the amulet fastened against the skin, all become part of an answer to a world that is never fully secure. In that sense, Heka belongs not only to official religion, but to the ordinary struggle of staying alive. A person falls ill and seeks help. A household fears a snake, a scorpion, a nightmare, a wasting pain, or an unseen attack. A traveller wants safe passage. A mother seeks protection around birth and recovery. The tomb of the dead must be guarded, the king must be shielded, the land itself must be defended against chaos, rebellion, hunger, and misfortune. Heka moves through all these settings because it is not reserved for one narrow class of events. It is a way of mobilizing order against threat. At times it looks majestic, wrapped in temple theology and royal ritual. At times it looks intimate and small, fitting into a bead, a knot, a figurine, or a whispered recitation over oil and water. What makes the Egyptian case especially compelling is that this power is not treated as marginal to the civilized world. It sits near the center of it. Modern categories often pull experience into separate drawers. Medicine goes in one, religion goes in another. Magic, if the term is used at all, is set apart as superstition or performance. Ancient Egypt resists that arrangement. A remedy can include both ingredients and incantation. A temple can function as a place of prayer, knowledge, healing, and cosmic maintenance at once. A written spell can be copied with the same disciplined care given to administrative or literary texts. Scholars still debate how best to translate and frame many of these practices, because the modern word magic carries distortions. It suggests a realm outside normal law, whereas Heka often appears as one of the hidden laws by which the world remains inhabitable. This helps explain why Egyptian material culture is so saturated with charged forms, protective eyes, girdle knots, pillars of stability, scarabs, divine dwarf figures, and lion-headed powers appear not merely because they are decorative, they do something, or rather, the Egyptians believed they could do something when correctly made, activated, worn, placed, or recited over. Form, material, colour, inscription, touch, and voice are not separate components accidentally piled together. They are cooperating agents. The amulet on the chest, the spell on the papyrus, the image on the wand, and the myth recited over the patient all work by joining the visible object to an invisible pattern of force. Even kings depend on that pattern. So do gods, at least in the way Egyptian theology often imagines divine action. Heka is not a desperate substitute for failed reason. It is a resource woven into the fabric of creation. Later, that force can even appear as a deity in its own right. But the deeper idea comes first. Power exists in the world, and life depends on knowing how to align with it. That knowledge can heal, preserve, and legitimize. It can also threaten, because anything capable of protection can potentially be turned toward harm. For now, though, the lamp is still burning in the sick room. The knot has been tightened, the words have been spoken, and a civilization begins to come into view through one of its most revealing acts, the quiet conviction that existence itself can be addressed, and that if one knows the right way to speak, bind, write, pour, or invoke, the world may answer. The lamplit room does not disappear, it widens. Behind the knot, the spoken formula, and the small object pressed against the body lies a much larger claim about existence. Heka is not simply something that humans invented in order to cope with fear. In Egyptian thought, it belongs to the structure of the world itself. The ritual practitioner can draw upon it because the gods draw upon it, and the gods can draw upon it because the power is imagined as older than the ordered universe they inhabit. This does not mean that Heka is always described in one consistent doctrine. Egyptian theology is rarely that tidy. Different temples preserve different emphases, and texts separated by centuries may place the same force in different relationships. Yet across those variations, one idea remains remarkably persistent: creation is not only made of matter, divine beings, and cosmic order. It is also made possible by effective power. Some Egyptian traditions speak of Heka as a force. Others give that force a body, a name, and divine identity. The god Heka can appear among the deities, sometimes connected with the solar creator, sometimes presented as a accompanying divine action, and sometimes shown as a power available to both gods and humans. His iconography is not as fixed or famous as that of Osiris, Isis, or Anubis, and he never becomes the center of a single popular mythology known from one grand narrative. That absence is revealing. Heka does not need to dominate the divine world as a king dominates a court. His importance lies in being present wherever divine action becomes effective. He is less a solitary ruler than the capacity by which rulership, speech, healing, protection, and transformation can actually work. This is why it would be misleading to call Heka the supreme god or the sole creator of the universe. Egyptian creation traditions are plural. At Heliopolis, creation may be expressed through Atum and the unfolding of the Ennead. At Memphis, Ptah creates through heart and tongue, thought and authoritative speech. At Hermopolis, primeval forces emerge from the dark waters before the first sunrise. Elsewhere, Amun, Khnum, Neith, or other deities can stand near the beginning of existence. These accounts do not cancel one another in the modern sense. They overlap, compete, and illuminate different aspects of reality. Heka moves through them not as a replacement for every creator, but as a condition of effective creation. The creator intends, speaks, separates, names, or fashions. Heka is the power through which intention becomes event. That relationship is especially clear when creation is imagined as a victory over formlessness. Before fields, temples, bodies, kingship, and time are ordered, there is the undifferentiated condition symbolized by the primeval waters. From that condition emerges a world that must be continually maintained. Creation is therefore not only a moment in the distant past, it is an ongoing achievement. The sun rises again, the Nile returns, the dead are restored, the king renews order, and the temple ritual repeats divine beginnings on a human scale. Heka participates in this renewal because the same potency that allowed the first transformation can be invoked again. A healer who identifies a patient with Horus, a priest who awakens a divine image, or a funerary officiant who restores the dead is not merely imitating myth. The ritual reopens an ancient channel of power. That force is not automatically moral in the modern sense. It can defend the weak, heal sickness, and protect the dead. But it can also constrain, repel, silence, or destroy an enemy. Its legitimacy depends heavily on context, authority, and alignment with order. An aggressive rite against a serpent, rebel, hostile spirit, or foreign enemy may be presented not as wickedness, but as necessary defense. The same gesture of binding that looks sinister in isolation can become protective when the target is identified with chaos. Scholars still debate how far Egyptians distinguished acceptable ritual from illegitimate sorcery in different periods, and legal accusations show that knowledge could be feared when turned against the palace or private individuals. No single explanation fully accounts for every case. Heka is powerful precisely because it cannot be reduced to simple categories of good and evil. The god Heka embodies this ambiguity without becoming a demon of disorder. In some theological settings, he can be described as existing before duality, before the division of the cosmos into familiar oppositions. Such language places him near the beginning, but not above every divine being. It indicates that effective power is primordial. Before there can be a temple ritual, a medical incantation, or a protective amulet, there must first be a universe in which signs, words, images, and intentions can connect to consequences. Heka is the name Egyptians give to that possibility. Once the world exists, the power does not withdraw. It remains available, though never casually. Knowledge, precision, preparation, and authority matter. This helps explain why ritual texts often insist on correct performance. The force may be universal, but access is disciplined. Words must be spoken in the right sequence. Names must be known. Materials must be prepared. The practitioner must assume an identity established by myth or office. A mistake does not merely spoil a performance, it can sever the link between present need and primordial precedent. What survives in the record suggests that Egyptians did not imagine Heka as wishful thinking, made powerful by belief alone. It operated through correspondences believed to be real between image and being, name and essence, myth and present event, sacred speech and cosmic authority. The small sick room now stands inside a far older landscape. The knot tied beside the patient echoes the first acts of ordering. The spoken words borrow the authority of divine speech. The charm rests against the body because matter itself can carry relation, memory, and force. Heka has not arrived from outside the world to interrupt nature. It is already there, older than temples and older than kings, waiting within the created order for someone who knows how to call it into action. Its mystery begins with that unsettling closeness. That closeness makes one modern assumption especially difficult to preserve. If Heka belongs to the created order, then it cannot be placed neatly outside religion, medicine, or practical knowledge. Ancient Egyptian texts do not present a clean battlefield in which rational physicians struggle against superstitious magicians, while priests occupy a separate sacred sphere. The same manuscript may contain observations about symptoms, instructions for preparing a remedy, and words to be spoken over the ingredients. A healer may examine the body, judge whether a condition can be treated, apply a substance, and invoke a divine precedent without feeling that the procedure has changed categories. To modernize, these elements appear mixed. To the Egyptians, they may have formed one coherent response to danger. The surviving medical papyri make this clear, although they do not all speak with the same voice. Some passages are strikingly practical. They describe wounds, fractures, swellings, burns, eye conditions, digestive complaints, skin problems, and other afflictions in language that can sound clinical. A practitioner inspects, touches, smells, questions, and compares. Certain cases are classified as treatable, uncertain, or beyond intervention. Elsewhere, ingredients are measured, ground, boiled, strained, applied, swallowed, or bandaged onto the body. Yet beside these procedures appear incantations, invocations, and mythic identifications. The presence of ritual language does not erase the observation, and the presence of observation does not disprove the ritual. They are two forms of action directed at different dimensions of the same crisis. This is one reason the word medicine can also mislead when used too narrowly. Illness in Egyptian thought could arise from many causes: injury, contaminated substances, bodily disturbance, hostile beings, divine displeasure, the activity of the dead, or forces that modern categories would classify differently. The exact causal model often remains uncertain, and the texts do not always explain why one remedy or spell was chosen. What survives in the record suggests a layered approach. A wound may need cleaning and binding, pain may need soothing, a harmful agent may need expulsion, a supernatural attacker may need to be named, threatened, or compelled. The healer responds not to a single abstract diagnosis, but to a vulnerable person whose body, social world, and sacred relationships are all involved. Temples likewise resist a reduction to places of worship alone. They are houses of gods, centers of ritual, economic institutions, archives, workshops, schools, and repositories of specialized knowledge. Within them, priests maintain divine images, calculate festivals, copy texts, prepare offerings, and preserve traditions of healing and protection. The daily temple ritual is itself an act of cosmic maintenance. The image of the god is awakened, clothed, purified, fed, and returned to seclusion. None of this is merely symbolic in the weak modern sense. The rite sustains a relationship on which order depends. Heka is therefore present not as an embarrassing survival of superstition, but as part of the official work by which gods and humans cooperate. That institutional setting also shaped which practices were copied, preserved, and transmitted, leaving modern scholars a record weighted toward literate and privileged environments. The same logic extends into law and kingship. Oaths, curses, decrees, and royal inscriptions can carry more than informational content. Words establish obligations, invoke divine witnesses, protect boundaries, and threaten consequences. A king defeating chaos in temple relief does not simply record a military event. The image participates in the ideal of perpetual victory. Enemies are shown subdued because rebellion must remain subdued. The distinction between political statement, religious image, and magical act becomes difficult to maintain. Scholars still debate how Egyptian viewers understood particular scenes, but the repeated combination of text, image, placement, and ritual context suggests that representation itself could be active. This does not mean every object, inscription, or spoken phrase was automatically magical. Context mattered, authority mattered, preparation mattered. A casual sentence was not equivalent to a consecrated formula, and decorative imagery was not necessarily activated in the same way as a temple relief, funerary vignette, or amulet. The danger in correcting modern assumptions is to swing too far and label everything Heka. Ancient Egypt was saturated with sacred meaning, but it also contained administration, craftsmanship, humor, commerce, routine labor, and ordinary speech. The challenge is not to erase distinctions, but to recognize that the Egyptians drew them differently. One useful way to see this is to follow a remedy from beginning to end. A plant is selected because of its observable properties, traditional reputation, divine association, wordplay, color, or place within an inherited recipe. It is mixed with oil, beer, honey, milk, mineral powder, or water. The preparation may be heated or left overnight. A formula is recited over it, perhaps identifying the patient with a god who once suffered and recovered. The substance is then swallowed, rubbed on the skin, poured, inhaled, or applied beneath a bandage. Each step contributes something. The ingredients act physically as the Egyptians understood them. The words establish authority and mythic precedent. The ritual gesture directs the treatment toward the proper target. The process is practical and sacred at once, The London Medical Papyrus offers a vivid example of this interweaving. Its surviving columns contain treatments and spells concerned with burns, skin disorders, eye complaints, and other conditions. The document does not apologize for moving between recipe and recitation, nor does it announce that one method is scientific while the other belongs to belief. The manuscript preserves a repertoire. A practitioner chooses from inherited techniques according to need, perhaps combining several because no single action fully accounts for illness or recovery. This flexibility is not evidence that Egyptians lacked reason. It shows reason operating within a different map of causation. That map also leaves room for failure. A patient may not recover, a prognosis may be unfavorable, a remedy may be repeated, adjusted, or abandoned. Egyptian healers were not living in a world where every spell was assumed to succeed automatically. The texts preserve uncertainty, limits, and gradations of confidence. Their authors knew that bodies could resist intervention and that death remained unavoidable. Heka offered agency, not omnipotence. It allowed people to act when confronted by forces they could only partly understand, but it did not remove danger from the world. The lamplit ritual therefore belongs to a larger system of knowledge rather than to an isolated realm of enchantment. The healer's hand, the priest's recitation, the scribe's signs, the pharmacist's mixture, and the family's hope converge around the same suffering body. Religion does not begin where medicine ends, and Heka does not appear only when practical measures fail. All three are already present, layered together, because healing means restoring order wherever disorder has entered. To perform that work, however, someone must know the texts, the names, the materials, and the proper sequence. The power may fill the cosmos, but its disciplined use belongs to particular hands. Those particular hands belong to people whose roles were more varied than the modern image of an Egyptian magician suggests. There was no single profession that monopolized Heka, and no secret caste standing entirely outside Egyptian institutions. Knowledge was distributed among specialists whose duties often overlapped. A physician might diagnose and prepare remedies. A lector priest might read powerful text aloud. A priest of Sekhmet might confront disease through the authority of a dangerous healing goddess. A scribe might copy formulas, record names, or preserve ritual instructions. Craftsmen could shape amulets and images that would later be activated through words and gestures. Their boundaries were real but not rigid, and scholars still debate how much practical overlap existed. Among the most important specialists was the lector priest, known through a title associated with carrying and reading the ritual book. In temple and funerary contexts, he was the expert voice that made written knowledge audible. His authority did not come from theatrical display. It came from literacy, training, memory, office, and access to texts that ordinary people could not easily read. When he recited a formula, the act joined the visible signs on papyrus to the spoken force believed to make them effective. In funerals, he helped restore the dead through prescribed speech. In protective and healing rites, he could identify the sufferer with the divine figure and confront the threat as though reenacting a mythic crisis. What survives in the record suggests that correct recitation was not an ornament added to ritual. It was one of the ritual's central mechanisms. The physician occupied a related but distinct field. Egyptian medical titles indicate degrees of specialization, though modern attempts to map them onto contemporary professions can be misleading. Some healers were attached to institutions, estates, temples, or the royal court. Others may have served local communities. Their practice could include observation, prognosis, manual treatment, pharmacology, and ritual speech. A healer examining a wound or swelling was not necessarily the same person who performed every incantation, but the surviving texts show that these techniques belonged to a shared medical environment. The practical and the sacred were not rivals. They could be combined or emphasized according to the illness. Priests associated with Sekhmet add another layer. Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, embodied destructive heat, plague, royal fury, and the power to repel the very forces she could unleash. Her priests therefore became linked with managing dangerous afflictions, particularly those imagined as epidemic or invasive. The logic is characteristic of Egyptian religion. The being capable of causing devastation is also uniquely qualified to restrain it. A priest of Sekhmet did not merely pray for mercy. He operated within a theology of controlled danger, seeking to turn divine ferocity away from the patient and against the source of disorder. The same goddess who threatens humanity can become its defender. Behind these practitioners stood institutions often described by the Egyptian term translated as the House of Life. The exact organization and functions of every House of Life remain uncertain, and it would be a mistake to imagine a single nationwide academy operating identically for 3,000 years. Yet the term is associated with temple learning, scribal activity, the copying and preservation of sacred texts, and the production of specialized knowledge. It evokes rooms where manuscripts were stored, studied, repaired, recopied, and perhaps taught. Medical, ritual, theological, astronomical, and funerary traditions could all circulate through such environments. The survival of complex papyri presupposes not only inspired individuals, but systems of training and transmission. That transmission was fragile. Papyrus decays, ink fades, wooden tablets split, libraries are dispersed, reused, burned, or buried. Much of what once existed has vanished, leaving isolated manuscripts whose original settings are difficult to reconstruct. A museum text may once have belonged to a working collection, copied, annotated, and consulted repeatedly. Some papyri contain errors, corrections, abbreviated instructions, or passages whose meaning may have been clearer to trained users than it is to modern readers. Many were tools rather than display books. A damaged manuscript can therefore preserve only the visible edge of a much larger professional world, one in which teachers, apprentices, suppliers, patients, and temple administrators all helped ritual knowledge move from text into practice. The user of such a tool needed more than literacy. Ritual competence involved knowing when a formula applied, how an object should be prepared, which divine identity to assume, and what gestures accompanied the words. Instructions might specify that a passage be spoken over oil, water, cloth, an amulet, or a figurine. The practitioner turned written prescription into action. This is where the surviving collections translated by scholars such as Joris Borghout's become especially revealing. Their formulas are not free-floating poetry. They are compressed scripts for intervention. A few lines can contain diagnosis, command, mythology, and practical direction. Some practitioners probably served elite households and temples, while others worked at a more modest scale. People who made protective objects, supplied ingredients, tied ritual knots, or recited inherited formulas may not always have held prestigious titles. The archaeological record favours durable objects and literate institutions, so everyday expertise is easily lost. A charm used in a village home may leave little trace. An oral formula transmitted within a family may disappear completely. The record therefore presents a distorted picture in which formal specialists are more visible than informal ones. It would be unwise either to make temples the source of all Heka, or to invent a hidden folk tradition from thin evidence. What can be said with greater confidence is that authority mattered. The practitioner often speaks not as an isolated individual, but through a divine or institutional identity. He may declare himself to be Thoth, Horus, Isis, or another powerful being for the duration of the rite. This is strategic alignment, not a claim of permanent divinity. By entering the role established in myth, the practitioner gains the right to command, heal, repel, or restore. The patient likewise may be identified with a god who once suffered and survived. Ritual becomes a transfer of status. The present crisis is placed inside an ancient pattern whose outcome is already known. That method demanded discipline rather than improvisation alone. Names had to be pronounced, images handled, substances measured, and sequences remembered. A healer or priest could be respected because he possessed knowledge unavailable to most people. But that knowledge also carried risk. Used correctly, it defended order. Turned against the palace or another person, it could be treated as abuse. Later accusations surrounding political conspiracy would expose that fear with unusual clarity. For now, the specialist remains beside the patient, not as a mysterious outsider, but as a trained operator within Egyptian society. The power is cosmic, yet its effects depend on skill, office, memory, and the human voice that knows how to give it form. The human voice gives Heka form, but the voice does not work alone. It depends on words chosen with precision, names understood as more than labels, and signs capable of fixing power into visible form. In Egyptian ritual, speech is effective because language is tied to the structure of reality. To name a being is to identify it, locate it, and in some circumstances gain leverage over it. To write a name is to make that identity present in a durable medium. To speak a formula established by divine precedent is to place the present crisis inside a story whose ending has already been secured. Yet this does not mean that every word spoken by an Egyptian was automatically magical, or that every inscription was believed to alter the world. Context, authority, performance, and intention determined when language became operative. A ritual formula often begins by identifying the speaker. The practitioner may declare himself to be Thoth, Isis, Horus, or another divine figure whose authority is relevant to the danger at hand. This is not theatrical impersonation in the modern sense. It is a controlled assumption of identity. The speaker enters a role preserved by myth and borrows the power attached to it. If Isis once healed Horus through knowledge and speech, then a healer speaking as Isis can apply that ancient victory to a present patient. If Thoth once restored order through wisdom and command, then his name and voice can be summoned against confusion, poison, or hostile force. The ritual does not merely remember the myth, it makes the myth available again. This method is sometimes called a mythic precedent, or historiola, a brief sacred narrative embedded within a spell. A divine being suffers, acts, speaks, or overcomes, and the human crisis is then identified with that earlier event. The patient becomes Horus. The illness becomes the venom, wound, or attack that once threatened him. The practitioner becomes Isis or Thoth. Because the divine story ends in recovery, the human case is directed toward the same conclusion. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every spell follows this pattern. but it is one of the clearest ways Egyptian ritual links language to causation. The spoken story is not background explanation, it is part of the treatment. Names are central to this process because an Egyptian name is bound closely to identity. A person can be remembered, invoked, protected, honoured, or attacked through the name. Erasing a name from a monument can therefore carry consequences beyond ordinary political censorship. Preserving a name in a tomb helps sustain the dead. Writing the name of an enemy on a figurine or vessel makes that enemy ritually accessible. Knowing a divine name can grant the speaker a path toward divine authority, especially when the name is secret, unusual, or revealed through sacred knowledge. Later texts from Greek, Demotic, and Coptic Egypt expand this fascination into long sequences of powerful names, but the principle has deep Egyptian roots. The importance of names does not imply a simple belief that pronunciation alone compels any god. Divine relationships are not mechanical in so crude a sense. A name works within a larger network of legitimacy. The speaker must know the correct formula, possess an appropriate role, use the prescribed object or substance, and invoke a precedent that gives the command weight. Ritual language frequently combines praise, identification, appeal, threat, and direct order. A god may be reminded of an obligation, addressed through titles, or urged to act by reference to cosmic danger. A hostile being may be named and expelled. The tone can shift from reverence to command because the practitioner speaks through established authority rather than private arrogance. Writing gives this authority endurance. Hieroglyphs are not only a method of recording sound and meaning. In sacred settings, their forms can participate in what they represent. An image of a serpent may be cut, damaged, or altered so that the creature cannot become dangerous within a tomb or ritual text. A divine figure may be carefully completed because its presence is beneficial. Signs can be arranged, coloured, and placed according to ritual purpose. Yet scholars still debate how broadly such practices should be interpreted. Not every damaged sign is the result of magical fear, and not every image was treated as literally alive. What survives suggests a selective understanding of representation under the right conditions. Resemblance and inscription could establish a real connection. Wordplay also mattered. Egyptian ritual could exploit similarities in sound between a substance, a deity, an action, and a desired result. A plant might be selected partly because its name echoed a verb of protection or expulsion. A material's colour could connect it with life, danger, purity, or regeneration. These associations can appear arbitrary to modern readers, but within the Egyptian language they created chains of correspondence. The spoken pun, the chosen ingredient, and the mythic reference reinforced one another. Heka worked through convergence. The more closely word object, image, and precedent aligned, the stronger the ritual claim became. The role of Isis offers one of the clearest examples of speech's power. She's repeatedly portrayed as a goddess of knowledge, healing, protection, and strategic intelligence. Her words succeed because she understands names, relationships, and vulnerabilities. In some traditions, she gains access to hidden divine power by learning a secret name. In healing spells, she speaks over the suffering Horus and transforms maternal concern into authoritative command. Her voice is not gentle decoration surrounding the cure. It is the means by which disorder is identified, challenged, and reversed. The healer who speaks in her role draws upon that model of effective knowledge. Still, language alone is rarely the whole operation. A spell may need to be spoken over water, oil, linen, an amulet, a figurine, or medicine. The text may be written, washed, folded, burned, worn, or placed against the body. Speech activates matter, while matter gives speech a place to remain. A name can be trapped in wax, carried on papyrus, or dissolved into water. A protective formula can move from the mouth to the skin through an object prepared to receive it. The distinction between word and thing begins to blur because each completes the other. The practitioner beside the lamp therefore does more than recite memorized lines. He constructs a precise chain between myth and present danger, between identity and name, between written sign and spoken sound. The patient is placed inside a language of survival that reaches back to the gods. If the right words are spoken by the right person over the right material, the present moment can be made to resemble an earlier victory. But words need bodies, and power needs substances capable of holding it. Around the bowl and papyrus lie wax, oil, ink, thread, clay, and plants, waiting for language to enter them. Wax softens in the warmth of the hand. Clay takes the pressure of a thumb, ink spreads through papyrus fibers, oil carries scent across skin, while water receives words, pigment, and the memory of whatever has been washed into it. In Egyptian ritual, these materials are never merely supports for an idea that exists somewhere else. They are part of the operation itself. Heka becomes effective through contact with things that can be shaped, mixed, tied, burned, buried, poured, worn, or destroyed. A spoken formula may establish authority, but matter gives that authority a body. The practitioner does not simply describe a transformation. He builds one from substances chosen for their physical qualities, symbolic associations, names, colours, origins, and ability to move power. Wax is among the most striking examples because it is both fragile and controllable. It can be warmed, modelled into a figure, inscribed, pierced, melted, crushed, or burned. An image formed from wax can represent a god, a protective being, an enemy, a disease, or a person whose identity is attached through a written name or strand of hair. Once the figure has been made, actions performed upon it are directed toward what it represents. Binding the image restrains, piercing attacks, melting dissolves, burning annihilates. Yet wax is not inherently sinister. The same material can serve protective, funerary, healing, or hostile purposes. Its meaning comes from the ritual sequence and the identity assigned to the object. One surviving wax figure in the British Museum makes the intimacy of such practices visible. Human hair was incorporated into the object, and a small papyrus text was attached to its body. The combination brings representation, writing, and bodily substance into a single construction. Hair is useful because it comes from a person and remains materially connected to that person after separation. The papyrus supplies identity or instruction. The wax provides a body that can be handled. Together they create a ritual substitute through which influence can be attempted remotely. Scholars still debate the exact purpose of individual objects when their archaeological context is uncertain. But the logic of combination is difficult to miss. Clay and mud serve related functions. They are common, mouldable, and tied to earth from which bodies, buildings, vessels, and fields emerge. A clay figure can be formed quickly, marked with a name, broken, buried, or enclosed within a container. Earth receives what is placed within it, hides it, and holds it in a controlled location. To bury a threatening image is therefore not simply to discard it. The act can immobilize, contain, or remove the represented danger from the living world. What appears archaeologically as a broken fragment may once have been the final stage of an ordered performance. Papyrus and ink make power legible, portable, and repeatable. A formula written on a sheet can be stored, copied, folded, worn, placed inside an amulet case, attached to a figure, or dissolved into liquid. Ink itself may be prepared according to instructions that matter to the rite. Color can distinguish protective, dangerous, divine, or hostile content. Black ink, associated with fertile soil in ordinary writing, carries different resonances from red, which can evoke blood, fire, desert, disorder, or dangerous beings. Red signs may mark hostile names or words requiring control, though practices vary across periods. It would be too simple to assign one fixed meaning to every pigment, but scribes understood color as more than decoration. Water is powerful because it moves between surfaces and bodies. It cleanses, cools, carries, and enters the person who drinks it. A text or carved image can be washed so that water passes over divine figures and sacred words, taking their efficacy into itself. The liquid may then be swallowed, poured over the patient, or applied to an afflicted area. The words remain visible, yet their power is believed to travel through the water. This practice becomes especially important in healing against snakebite and scorpion venom, where water poured over Horus Stele links the sufferer to the god's rescue. The substance is practical and ritual. Cool liquid touches the body while divine protection is transferred through contact. Oil and unguents perform work. They soften skin, carry plant ingredients, preserve moisture, produce fragrance, and allow substances to adhere. Scent can signal purity, divine presence, or the expulsion of corruption. A healer may apply oil while reciting a formula, turning touch into a controlled point of transfer. Honey, beer, milk, resins, fats, minerals, and plant preparations can all enter medical and ritual recipes. Some ingredients may have observable therapeutic properties, others are selected through tradition, analogy, wordplay, or sacred association. Often the reasons overlap. The evidence remains incomplete, and modern chemical analysis cannot recover the full logic of a recipe whose ingredients were understood as both substances and signs. Blood and other animal materials appear in certain instructions, though they should not define Egyptian magic. When used, bodily substances carry potency because they belong to living creatures and may embody particular qualities. Hair, milk, fat, skin, bone, or blood can establish connection, transfer strength, or contribute to an analogy. Plants work similarly. Their smell, color, growth pattern, habitat, medicinal effect, and name can all matter. A thorny plant may repel, a fragrant resin may purify, a seed may suggest renewal. Egyptian ritual thought gathers these qualities rather than choosing between physical and symbolic explanations. Thread and knots reveal how little material is required to create a powerful act. A cord can encircle, fasten, measure, restrain, or protect. Knots hold a condition in place. They may secure an amulet to the body, close a packet, bind an enemy figure, or create a protective girdle. The action is simple enough to be domestic, yet it can also appear in formal ritual. Number, color, fiber, and the words spoken during tying may all contribute. Once tightened, the knot preserves the spoken intention in material form. It is speech made durable through tension. Fire reverses that durability. Burning transforms an object beyond recovery, releasing smoke, heat, and ash. To burn an enemy image is to deny it stable form. To burn written names can enact destruction more completely than merely reading a curse. Breaking, trampling, stabbing, and grinding operate through the same principle. The object is treated as the thing represented, yet such violence is usually framed as defense against disorder, not uncontrolled malice. Context determines whether destruction restores Ma'at or violates it. Around the practitioner lies no collection of random props. Each material has been selected because it can carry a relationship. Wax receives form, ink fixes identity, water transfers power, oil carries treatment, thread holds intention, fire ends what must not continue. Heka is not floating above these substances as an invisible idea. It moves through them, becoming tangible enough to touch the body and durable enough to remain after the voice falls silent. The smallest objects can carry the most carefully assembled power. An amulet may be no larger than a fingernail, yet its effect is believed to depend on several layers working together, the shape chosen by the maker, the material from which it is carved, the color it presents, the words placed upon it, the place where it is worn, and the ritual that prepares it for use. The difficulty lies in context. Some objects are primarily decorative, some declare rank or devotion, and some are designed to protect, restore, or transmit a divine quality. An amulet is best understood not as a passive symbol, but as a compact arrangement of correspondences. A scarab evokes the beetle that appears to bring itself into being and becomes linked with the rising sun, renewal, and transformation. The wedget eye recalls the injured and restored eye of Horus, making wholeness itself wearable. The jed pillar embodies stability and is closely associated with the enduring backbone of Osiris. The Taweret knot is tied to Isis and can convey her protective power. Their forms are not selected because they resemble vague ideas. Each form belongs to a network of myths, divine bodies, ritual texts, and repeated visual associations. To place the object on a person or mummy is to bring that network into physical contact with the wearer. Material deepens the connection. Gold does not tarnish and shines like the flesh of the gods in Egyptian religious imagination. Faience, with its luminous blue-green surface, evokes water, vegetation, regeneration, and sunlight flashing on life-giving surfaces. Lapis lazuli, turquoise, carnelian, feldspar, hematite, shell, bone, ivory, wood, and common stone each possess qualities that may shape an amulet's meaning. Color matters even when the substance only imitates a more expensive material. Blue and green can suggest renewal, growth, the Nile, and divine vitality. Red may carry life, heat, blood, protection, or danger depending on context. Black can evoke fertile soil, regeneration, and the transformed body of Osiris. No single color code applies without exception, but Egyptian makers clearly treated appearance as an active property. The choice of material could therefore reinforce the shape, or deliberately modify it. A green heart scarab does not communicate through beetle form alone. Its color, inscription, placement over the chest, and connection with funerary judgment all contribute. A small image of a deity carved in a substance associated with that deity can transmit more specific protection. An amulet showing Bez, Taweret, Sekhmet, or another divine figure does not contain the whole god in a simple literal sense. Rather, it makes a controlled manifestation of divine character available at the scale of the human body. fierceness, fertility, stability, rebirth, or healing becomes portable. Words can add another mechanism. Some amulets bear divine names, short formulas, royal titles, or passages instructing the object's role. Others depend on words spoken over them during preparation. A text may specify that an image be made from a particular material, threaded on a certain color cord, and placed at a precise point on the body while a formula is recited. The finished object is therefore the last stage of a process. Without knowing the lost words and actions that once accompanied many museum pieces, modern observers see only the surviving hardware of the rite. Placement is especially important because the Egyptian body is not treated as an undifferentiated surface. The neck, chest, heart, throat, limbs, fingers, and points of injury can require different forms of protection. An amulet worn in life may guard the body at a vulnerable location. In burial, groups of amulets can be placed among mummy wrappings according to funerary custom, with particular objects assigned to the heart, throat, abdomen, or other regions. The arrangement changes across time and status, and the evidence remains incomplete. Yet what survives suggests that placement establishes a circuit between object and body. The amulet does not protect from a distance. It occupies the place where its quality is needed. This bodily intimacy explains the importance of cords, necklaces, bracelets, rings, and sewn packets. To wear an amulet is to keep it in motion with breath, pulse, heat, and skin. The cord may itself be ritually significant, particularly when knotted, coloured, or counted. A written charm folded into a container can rest against the chest even when its signs remain hidden. The object works because it has been prepared and positioned, not because an audience can admire it. Some of the most consequential components may be concealed inside wrappings, beneath clothing, or within a small case. The amulet's scale also allows protection to enter ordinary life. Monumental temples require wealth, labour, and institutional access. A small bead or moulded faience figure can circulate far more widely. Workshops can produce repeated forms, while individual users choose, inherit, dedicate, or combine them. This does not mean every household possessed the same objects or understood them identically. Quality ranges from exquisite gold pieces to inexpensive moulded examples. The variation reveals both social inequality and broad participation. Heka could be monumental, but it could also be held between two fingers. Amulets change over Egypt's long history. Forms rise and fall in popularity. New divine figures appear. Old signs acquire additional meanings. Objects made for the living can enter burials, while funerary types sometimes draw on earlier domestic protection. Archaeologists must therefore resist interpreting an amulet only through a general dictionary of symbols. Date, find spot, material, associated objects, and bodily placement all matter. A scarab from a settlement, a heart scarab from a burial, and a seal used in administration may share a beetle form while performing different tasks. Scholars still debate many ambiguous pieces because beauty, identity, authority, and protection cannot always be separated. Even so, the underlying principle is clear. Egyptian amulets combine form and force with extraordinary economy. A few centimetres of stone or faience can carry a myth, a divine body, a colour of renewal, a spoken command, and a precise relationship to the wearer. They are miniature devices in the sense that their components are meant to cooperate, though not machines in a modern mechanical sense. Their operation belongs to a world of sacred correspondences rather than gears. Shape directs the power, Material gives it character. Words awaken or define it. Placement delivers it where needed. The practitioner beside the lamp may now lift such an object from the table. Before touching the patient, he recites over it, perhaps moistens it, threads it, or tightens a knot. The amulet is small enough to disappear beneath linen, but within Egyptian thought it has become crowded with presence. It holds a fragment of divine stability against a body exposed to uncertainty. From the sick room it will travel outward toward doorways, beds, birth spaces, and the daily boundaries where households seek protection without the walls of a temple around them. The amulet disappears beneath linen, but the need for protection does not end at the skin. It extends into the house itself, across thresholds, sleeping places, courtyards, and spaces where birth, recovery, and illness make life feel exposed. Egyptian homes were not miniature temples, yet they were not spiritually empty either. Their walls contained images, small figures, household shrines, protective signs, and objects whose purpose was to keep danger from crossing into intimate space. Heka moved here in quieter forms, far from monumental pylons, but no less serious for the families who depended on it. The doorway was one of the most important boundaries. It separated the ordered interior from the uncertain world outside, while also allowing people, animals, dust, strangers, and unseen influences to pass through. A threshold could therefore be watched, marked, or ritually defended. Images of protective beings might be placed near entrances, and spoken formulas could be directed against whatever attempted to cross with harmful intent. The same logic applied to windows and beds. Boundaries were useful because they made danger easier to imagine and control. What could not be eliminated from the world might at least be stopped at the edge of the household. Sleep created another vulnerability. The sleeping body is still, unaware, and temporarily separated from control. Dreams could bring messages, warnings, or disturbing encounters. Night also belonged to insects, snakes, scorpions, and other creatures that entered houses more easily than modern walls and screens allow. Protection around the bed was therefore both practical and ritual. A raised sleeping surface, a swept floor, a lamp, and a recited charm could all contribute to safety. Egyptians did not need to distinguish sharply between keeping a creature away physically and repelling the dangerous force associated with it. Both actions restored the same fragile sense of order. Among the most remarkable domestic protective objects are the curved wands often made from hippopotamus ivory during the Middle Kingdom. Their surfaces are crowded with powerful figures, lions, serpents, composite creatures, knife-bearing guardians, and deities associated with protection. The ivory itself came from an animal admired and feared for its strength. Its curved form follows the shape of the tusk, while the carved procession turns that natural material into a mobile defensive boundary. Many examples show wear, suggesting use before burial rather than manufacture solely for the tomb. Scholars still debate exactly how they were handled, but they may have been moved around a bed, body, or protected space, tracing an invisible enclosure through ritual gesture. These wands are often connected with pregnancy, birth, early care, and rebirth. Though the evidence provides no universal instruction manual, their imagery strongly favors beings capable of confronting danger. Some hold knives, not because the household ritual celebrates violence, but because protective force must be shown as stronger than the threat. The blade belongs to the guardian. The vulnerable person remains under care. Such objects may have been used during moments of heightened uncertainty, then preserved, inherited, or eventually placed in a grave where the protection of birth could be reinterpreted as protection for rebirth. Two divine figures stand out in this domestic world, Taweret and Bez. Taweret combines the heavy body of a pregnant hippopotamus with features of other powerful animals. To modern eyes she may appear strange, but her form gathers exactly the qualities needed for protection strength, maternal presence, and the ability to intimidate danger. She's often associated with birth and the household. Bes, with his frontal stance, broad face, mane, and compact body, confronts the viewer directly. Unlike many Egyptian figures shown in profile, he faces outward as though blocking an approach. He can appear on beds, headrests, vessels, amulets, and household objects, sometimes linked with music, sexuality, sleep, and protection. Their popularity reveals something important about Heka. The gods of domestic protection are not distant abstractions. They are designed to be encountered at close range. A figure of Bes may be carved where a sleeper can see it. Taweret may appear on an amulet worn against the body. Their power is accessible through familiar objects rather than formal priesthood alone. This does not mean every household performed identical rites or possessed elaborate equipment. Archaeology preserves some settlements and social groups far better than others. Elite houses, workers' villages, and later domestic contexts leave uneven evidence. Much oral practice has vanished entirely. Even so, the surviving objects suggest a broad desire to bring divine defense into routines. Birth and recovery were especially important because they involved uncertainty that no household could fully control. Protective practice might include amulets, spoken words, knots, images, ointments, fumigation, and the presence of experienced attendants. The mother could be identified with Isis or another divine figure, while the protected infant might be linked with Horus in a non-violent framework of divine care and safe continuity. The purpose was not to dramatize danger, but to surround the family with watchful presence. Heka offered a language for care when practical knowledge and bodily uncertainty met. Domestic ritual also addressed fertility, desire, conflict, nightmares, illness, and the hope for favorable outcomes. Small figurines, written charms, and household offerings could be used to seek help or repel trouble. Some practices may have been performed by specialists invited into the home. Others may have been carried out by family members using inherited knowledge. The boundary between professional and domestic expertise remains difficult to reconstruct. A person might know a short protective formula without belonging to a temple institution, just as someone today may know a household remedy without being a physician. The record is biased toward written texts, yet daily Heka was probably often spoken, demonstrated, and remembered rather than archived. This private use of power did not stand in opposition to official religion. Household gods belonged to the same sacred universe as temple gods, even if their scale and setting differed. A family could honor major deities, use protective objects, seek a healer, and participate in festivals without sensing contradiction. The house was not outside Ma'at. It was one of the places where order had to be continually repaired. Food preparation, sleep, healing, birth, memory, and family continuity all depended on boundaries that could fail. Heka gave those boundaries form. The oil lamp now illuminates more than one patient. It reveals a doorway marked against intrusion, a bed watched by fierce little gods, a curved ivory wand worn smooth by repeated handling, and an amulet resting close to the body. These objects do not prove that every fear was calmed or every ritual succeeded. They show people surrounding vulnerable moments with whatever knowledge and sacred power they possessed. Beyond the house, physicians and scribes preserved longer traditions on papyrus. Inside it, protection could be held in the hand, tied with thread, carved into ivory, or placed quietly beside the sleeping place until morning returned. Morning returns, and with it comes a different ritual space, not a household doorway or guarded bed, but a healer's working surface. Papyrus is unrolled, ingredients are named, symptoms are observed, the patient's body is examined for heat, swelling, discharge, stiffness, pain, odour, colour, and response to touch. He may ask how an injury occurred, whether a complaint has changed, or whether movement remains possible. He may then pronounce a judgment, prepare a remedy, bind a wound, or recite words intended to drive out a force that cannot be reached by the hand alone. The surviving medical papyri preserve this world in fragments, revealing a broad spectrum in which diagnosis, treatment, and Heka continually meet. The Edwin Smith Papyrus stands near one end of that spectrum. Its cases focus on wounds, fractures, dislocations, and injuries to the head, neck, shoulders, chest, and spine. A case is introduced, examined, diagnosed, and assigned a prognosis. The practitioner may declare it an ailment he will treat, one with which he will contend, or one not to be treated. Instructions follow for bandaging, positioning, applying substances, or observing changes. The text is often described as unusually rational, but that label creates a false contrast. It is not modern medicine appearing briefly in an otherwise magical culture. It shows one highly developed mode of Egyptian expertise alongside incantations and divine analogies. Even this text is not entirely free of ritual language, and the surviving manuscript is a later copy of older material, with glosses explaining difficult terms. Egyptian medical knowledge had a history. Scribes inherited writings whose language became obscure, then annotated them. The papyrus resembles a working intellectual tradition rather than a frozen revelation. Its observations suggest accumulated experience, though the exact settings in which the cases were used remain uncertain. Some may reflect practical instruction, others scribal training or the preservation of prestigious knowledge. Close attention to the body remains unmistakable. The Ebers Papyrus occupies a much broader field. It contains hundreds of remedies and discussions concerning internal complaints, skin conditions, parasites, eyes, digestion, pain, and other problems. Recipes call for plants, minerals, animal products, beer, honey, oil, and numerous substances whose identification is sometimes debated. Ingredients are ground, mixed, cooked, strained, swallowed, applied, inserted, or used in fumigation. Some preparations may have offered relief through antimicrobial, soothing, laxative, or other physical effects. Others are difficult to evaluate because the plants are uncertain, proportions unclear, or disease categories unlike modern ones. Praising every remedy as advanced pharmacology would be as misleading as dismissing the collection as superstition. Within the Ebers Papyrus, the body is treated through both substance and speech. Certain passages explain channels and bodily disturbances in ways that do not correspond neatly to modern anatomy. Others address hostile influences with formulas and commands. A remedy may be strengthened by a recitation, or a condition approached through both an applied preparation and the expulsion of a dangerous being. The healer is not switching between science and magic, as though choosing incompatible explanations. He is acting on several possible causes at once. If illness can be physical, divine, environmental, or invasive, then treatment must be equally layered. The Ebers Papyrus preserves another extensive collection of recipes, many concerning pain, wounds, urinary problems, bites, and bodily disorders. Its overlap with other papyri shows that formulations circulated and could appear in more than one collection. Repetition suggests a shared repertoire rather than isolated invention. At the same time, copied recipes could change, ingredients might be substituted, lines abbreviated, and sequences rearranged. A papyrus was not necessarily the complete medical library of one practitioner. It might be a selected handbook, teaching document, copied archive, or compilation assembled for reasons now lost. The Berlin Medical Papyri add further evidence for this culture of compilation. They contain diagnostic material, remedies, and texts concerned with conditions across the body. Some passages closely resemble material known elsewhere, indicating traditions recognizable across generations. Yet no surviving papyrus should be treated as universal manual. Different manuscripts emphasize different kinds of knowledge, and their dates, origins, and purposes vary. What appears to us as a canon may be the accidental survival of a small portion of a far larger textual world. The London Medical Papyrus makes the partnership between remedy and incantation especially visible. Treatments for burns, skin complaints, eye problems, and other afflictions stand beside spells against harmful influences. The transitions are not marked by embarrassment. A formula may address the condition directly, invoke a deity, or identify the patient with a divine figure. Practical preparation and sacred speech occupy the same page because both belong to treatment. The healer who measures an ingredient and the specialist who speaks over it may be the same person, cooperating practitioners, or roles combined differently in different settings. Diagnosis itself allowed uncertainty. Symptoms changed, and patients responded unpredictably. A swelling might soften or harden. A wound might close or worsen. Some texts instruct the practitioner to examine the patient again after time has passed. Prognosis could therefore be a judgment based on signs and expected development, not merely a declaration of fate. Heka did not eliminate the need to observe, and observation did not eliminate the possibility of hostile agency. The papyri also exposed the limits of reconstruction. They were produced by literate specialists and preserved through exceptional circumstances. They tell us little about treatments performed orally, locally, or without writing. They rarely provide the patient's voice. They do not reveal how consistently instructions were followed or how much disagreement existed among healers. A written formula may represent ideal procedure rather than everyday reality. Scholars still debate the identities of many substances and meanings of technical terms. Translation can make ancient categories appear more familiar than they were. Still, these manuscripts preserve the disciplined texture of Egyptian care. The healer observes before acting. He judges what can be treated, selects from inherited recipes, prepares substances with practiced hands, and speaks words whose authority reaches into myth. Sometimes the emphasis falls on anatomy and injury. Sometimes it falls on pharmacology. Sometimes the spoken charm dominates. Often all three remain close together. The patient before him is not merely a body of tissue, nor merely a victim of invisible forces, but a person standing where material vulnerability and cosmic order meet. The lamp from the opening scene now burns beside a medical papyrus, whose columns contain generations of accumulated responses to pain. A bandage is tightened. Honey or oil is applied. A prognosis is spoken carefully rather than promised recklessly. Then the practitioner turns to a danger demanding an even more concentrated union of medicine and myth. Beyond the walls, in fields, storerooms, and desert margins, snakes and scorpions remain part of Egyptian life. When venom enters the body, the healer must act quickly, and the story of Horus becomes more than an ancient tale. Venom enters quickly, and Egyptian ritual responds with equal speed. A snake bite or scorpion sting is a crisis in which the body, the environment, and the divine world collapse into one another. The patient may be in pain, swelling, weak, frightened, or uncertain whether the danger is passing or deepening. The healer must cool, bind, wash, apply remedies, and watch for decline before the swelling climbs higher. But he also confronts the venom as an active force, something that can be named, commanded, neutralized, and compelled to leave. In this setting, the story of Horus becomes one of the most powerful patterns available. Horus is repeatedly imagined as a vulnerable divine child protected by Isis. In healing texts, that vulnerability makes his rescue transferable. If even Horus, heir of Osiris and future defender of kingship, could be struck by venom and restored, then the human patient can be placed inside the same structure of suffering and recovery. The practitioner identifies the afflicted person with Horus, while Isis, Thoth, Serqet, Ra, or another divine power is summoned to act as they once acted in myth. The present sting becomes the old divine crisis returning in a smaller body. The outcome is directed toward survival, because the sacred precedent has already ended in restoration. This compressed use of myth gives the ritual its authority. Isis searches, diagnoses, speaks, and compels the hidden danger to reveal itself. Thoth arrives as the master of sacred knowledge and effective language. Serqet, associated with scorpions and protection from venom, can turn dangerous power against itself. Ra may be appealed to because the crisis threatens the order sustained by the gods. A spell can therefore escalate the patient's condition into a cosmic emergency. If Horus remains stricken, divine succession and universal balance are endangered. The gods must intervene because the world cannot proceed correctly while the poisoned one lies helpless. This language follows a precise ritual logic. The healer is not pretending that the patient literally becomes a god. He is aligning the case with a recognized divine pattern. The patient receives Horus's protected status. The practitioner receives the authority of Isis or Thoth. The venom is recast as an enemy already defeated in sacred history. A dangerous and unpredictable event is placed inside a story whose ending is known. The objects called Horus stelae or cippi make that story tangible. They commonly show the young Horus standing upon crocodiles while gripping snakes, scorpions, lions, gazelles, or other dangerous creatures. Above him may appear the protective face of Bes. Horus controls the animals around him, compressing many threats into one scene of divine dominance. Text carved across the front, back, and sides invoke protection, recount mythic rescues, and command venom or harmful beings to withdraw. It is tempting to describe these objects as magical monuments and stop there, but that can conceal their wider function. A cippus's image, text, sacred precedent, healing instrument, and ritual surface at once. Water can be poured over the carved figures and inscriptions, touching the words and divine bodies before collecting below. The liquid is then given to the patient to drink, poured over the affected area, or otherwise used in treatment. In Egyptian understanding, the water carries the protective force of what it has contacted. Speech, image, stone, and liquid become one chain of transmission. The metanic stela is among the most elaborate surviving examples, but smaller cippi served related purposes over long periods. Some may have stood in temple or healing settings, others were portable enough for intimate use. Their wear and context vary, and scholars still debate how consistently each was handled. What survives in the record suggests that the carved surface was activated through recitation, touch, washing, and repeated contact. The water itself occupied an ambiguous space between practical relief and sacred medicine. Cooling and washing could soothe the body, cleanse a wound, or make treatment easier. At the same time, the liquid became ritually charged through contact with text and image. Modern analysis tends to ask which element was medically effective and which was symbolic. Egyptian practice did not require that separation. Water could cool because of its physical nature and heal because divine words had entered it. Both claims belong to the same act. Remedies against bites and stings could also include plants, oils, minerals, bandaging, and spoken formulas. The exact species involved is not always clear, and ancient identifications do not map perfectly onto modern taxonomy. Some bites may have been non-venomous. Some illnesses attributed to venom may have had other causes. The texts preserve accumulated responses to threatening symptoms rather than controlled clinical trials. They show urgency, pattern recognition, and intervention on every available level. The language used against venom can be forceful. Poison is ordered not to rise, not to spread, not to enter the limbs, heart, or vessels. It may be told to fall, retreat, cool, or flow out. The command treats venom almost as a listening adversary. Yet the body is also observed materially. Swelling, heat, discoloration, weakness, and pain matter. The ritual does not replace attention to symptoms. It gives the healer another means of acting when the danger is invisible beneath the skin and time is limited. Serqet is especially important because she embodies the Egyptian habit of turning danger into protection. A scorpion goddess can defend against scorpions because she understands and governs their power. Her name, image, and authority are used not to deny the creature's threat, but to subordinate it. Isis works through knowledge. Thoth works through language. Horus provides the pattern of survival. Each divine figure contributes a distinct quality, and the practitioner assembles them around the patient like a wall. No single explanation fully accounts for how these rites were experienced. Some patients recovered because the dose was limited, the creature was less dangerous, or the body endured. Some remedies may have soothed symptoms. Others likely offered little direct physiological benefit. The recitation may have reduced panic, organized care, and brought specialists and family into a coordinated response. Yet reducing the rite to psychology would miss the ancient claim. Egyptians believed the mythic and divine dimensions were real. The patient lies beneath the combined pressure of medicine and sacred history. Water runs over the carved body of Horus, passes through lines of protective speech, and is gathered carefully. The healer speaks as Isis or Thoth, while Serqet's authority is turned toward defense. Venom is ordered downward, outward, away. Whether recovery follows cannot be guaranteed. Heka is not certainty. It is the disciplined refusal to leave the crisis unanswered. Once Egyptians learned to command invisible danger in the body, They applied the same logic to enemies beyond it: rebels, hostile powers, and forces of chaos whose names could be written, broken, burned, and buried. The logic used against venom could be turned outward. A dangerous force was first identified, then given a name, an image, or a material body that could be controlled. In state ritual, the targets might be rebels, foreign enemies, hostile rulers, criminals, demons, serpents, or unnamed powers believed to threaten Egypt's order. Their names were written on clay figures, jars, bowls, stones, or strips of material. Their bodies were represented in miniature, often bound or shown in positions of submission. Then the objects were broken, trampled, stabbed, burned, spat upon, buried, or sealed away. Modern observers call these actions execration rituals, but to the Egyptians they were not merely expressions of rage. They were attempts to weaken disorder before it acted. The principle was familiar. A name was not separate from the being who carried it. An image could establish a ritual connection with what it represented by writing an enemy's identity onto a vessel or figurine. The practitioner made that enemy present in a form that could be handled safely. Representation brought distance under control. Once the connection was established, actions performed upon the object were directed toward the person, group, or force named upon it. The ritual compressed political geography and supernatural danger into something small enough to hold in one hand. Some of the best-known execration texts survive from the Middle Kingdom and later periods. Lists of foreign rulers, regions, peoples, and internal opponents appear on objects created for destruction. The names are often accompanied by formulas that condemn rebellion and identify the targets as enemies of the king, the gods, or Egypt itself. These lists are valuable historical evidence, but they must be read cautiously. A named place may reflect diplomatic knowledge, inherited scribal tradition, or an ideal map of threat rather than an active war at the exact moment the text was written. Scholars still debate how directly individual lists correspond to contemporary political events. Ritual texts preserve ideology as well as information. The physical treatment of the objects was essential. A clay figure could be tied with cord to prevent movement. A vessel could be smashed so that the enemy's integrity was shattered. A figurine might be pierced, cut, burned, or placed beneath a structure where it would remain permanently subdued. Binding restricted, striking defeated, burning transformed. Burial removed the threat from ordinary space and fixed it in a controlled location. Their broken condition may be the final intended state of the ritual. This helps explain why groups of deliberately damaged objects have been recovered from forts, cemeteries, temple zones, and other charged locations. A border fortress marked where ordered territory confronted lands imagined as uncertain or hostile. Placing execration deposits there extended defense beyond walls and soldiers. A temple likewise required protection because it housed divine presence and helped sustain Ma'at. Enemies of the gods could be attacked ritually within sacred precincts, ensuring that cosmic rebellion remained defeated even when no human army was present. The violence of these rites can look like evidence of forbidden sorcery, but that interpretation reverses their official meaning. Many execration rituals belong to institutions of kingship and temple religion. They were performed not in secret rebellion against authority, but in defense of authority. The king's enemies were equated with the forces of chaos, and their ritual destruction reaffirmed the proper arrangement of the world. Temple reliefs showing the ruler smiting captives operate through a related visual grammar. The king raises his weapon, enemies are grouped beneath him, and victory becomes timeless. It makes royal domination continually present. This does not make the rites morally simple. They reveal how political opponents could be transformed into cosmic threats, allowing violence against them to appear necessary and sacred. Foreign peoples are reduced to names on objects designed to be broken. Internal dissent becomes rebellion against universal order. The state's definition of Ma'at determines who must be bound. What survives in the record usually reflects the viewpoint of institutions with the power to write, preserve, and perform these condemnations. The voices of those named as enemies are largely absent. Curses also protected tombs, monuments, offices, agreements, and sacred property. An inscription might threaten anyone who damaged a burial, erased a name, stole offerings, or violated a boundary. The threatened punishment could involve divine judgment, loss of burial, bodily suffering, social destruction, or denial of remembrance. Such language was designed to project authority into the future. The monument's owner would eventually be unable to defend the site physically, but written words could continue warning later readers. Robert Rittner's study of Egyptian curse language shows that these threats belong to a broad tradition of performative speech, in which saying what will happen helps establish the conditions under which it is expected to happen. Not every curse was accompanied by a smashed figure, and not every hostile inscription was treated as an independent spell. Egyptian practices range from formal temple rituals to legal warnings, funerary threats, personal appeals, and accusations of harmful Heka. Context remains decisive. A curse carved on a tomb door differs from a figurine buried at a fortress, though both rely on the capacity of words and representations to act beyond the moment of their creation. No single explanation fully accounts for all surviving examples. Archaeology adds another complication. An object may have been broken accidentally, reused, or damaged long after its original ritual life. Fire may come from destruction unrelated to ceremony. Burial may reflect disposal rather than deliberate containment. Recent attention to objects that were broken, burned, and buried has emphasized the need to reconstruct sequences instead of assigning meaning from appearance alone. Location, fracture patterns, associated texts, residues, and nearby deposits can reveal whether destruction was purposeful. Even then, certainty is rare. The ritual act is often gone, leaving only its material aftermath. Yet the central pattern remains visible. Egyptians could treat disorder by manufacturing a substitute for it. A hostile name became ink, a distant ruler became clay, a serpent, rebel, or demon became an image already bound. The threat was then subjected to a controlled drama of defeat. This was not the uncontrolled eruption of hatred, but an ordered performance intended to prevent chaos from acting freely. The same civilization that healed through identification with Horus could protect itself by identifying enemies with the serpent of disorder. Once that knowledge existed, however, it could not remain politically neutral. The techniques of naming, binding, and weakening were legitimate when directed by the state against its enemies. They became terrifying when officials believed those same methods had been turned against the palace itself. In the final years of Ramesses III, accusations surrounding wax figures, secret texts, and ritual specialists would expose the dangerous question hidden inside Heka, who had the right to use power, and what happened when sacred knowledge crossed from protection into conspiracy. The palace conspiracy against Rameses III is the point where Heka enters the historical record not merely as protection, healing, or state ritual, but as knowledge accused of being turned against royal power. A judicial papyrus describes a plot involving members of the royal household, officials, military personnel, and women of the harem who sought to alter the succession. The document records interrogations, trials, punishments, and the deliberate deformation of some names, as though the condemned should be denied ordinary remembrance. Among the accusations are references to ritual texts and wax figures prepared for hostile purposes. They do not prove that magic killed the king. They reveal that Egyptian authorities believed ritual expertise could assist treason. The plot appears to have centered on Queen Tai and an attempt to place her son Pentaweret on the throne, instead of the designated heir who became Rameses IV. A royal harem was not simply a private domestic retreat. It was an institution containing members of the king's household, attendants, administrators, workshops, estates, and networks of influence. Messages could move through it. Officials could be recruited. Gatekeepers and guards could be approached. The conspiracy therefore involved both political planning and attempts to breach controlled spaces. Heka was one instrument within a broader operation, not a substitute for organization, access, and human cooperation. One accused man, identified in the judicial record as a specialist who'd obtained writings from the royal archive, was said to have made wax figures and other objects intended to weaken guards. The phrasing varies according to translation, and the damaged text leaves uncertainties, but the allegation is clear ritual knowledge associated with legitimate institutions had been diverted toward an illicit objective. Figures of wax, combined with written formulas, were believed capable of rendering bodies ineffective, confusing resistance, or opening a path for conspirators. The authorities treated this not as harmless superstition, but as a weapon capable of undermining the palace's protective order. The accusation is striking because the techniques themselves were not foreign to Egyptian religion. Wax figures had long been used in protective and execration rites. Names could be written on images, enemies could be bound, pierced, melted, or burned. The difference lay in authorization and target. When a temple destroyed an image of chaos, the act defended Ma'at. When the state performed execration against rebels or foreign enemies, violence was framed as protection. But when private actors allegedly used similar methods against royal guards in the king's household, the same ritual technology became criminal. Heka had not changed in substance. Its legal status changed according to who used it, against whom, and under whose authority. This distinction reveals the political structure hidden inside Egyptian magic. Knowledge was never neutral simply because it was sacred. Access to texts, names, and ritual procedures could confer power. Temple libraries and royal archives preserved traditions meant to sustain divine and royal order. But those traditions could theoretically be copied, stolen, adapted, or recited with hostile intent. The conspiracy records therefore express fear of controlled knowledge escaping institutional boundaries. A trained practitioner could turn the language of protection inside out. The same confidence that made Heka useful to the state also made its misuse imaginable. The judicial documents are themselves political texts. They present the proceedings from the viewpoint of the victorious regime and transform the accused into enemies of proper order. Some names appear altered into insulting forms, a punishment extending beyond the body into memory. To corrupt a name is to damage identity. The record thus uses a technique related to the logic of Heka, while condemning others for abusing ritual power. The state prosecutes conspiracy through courts, but it also controls how the conspirators will exist in writing. Their identities survive only in forms marked by defeat. For years, scholars debated whether the plot succeeded in physically harming Ramesses III. The judicial papyrus does not narrate the king's death in a simple sequence, and older examinations of the mummy produced uncertainty. Modern computed tomography changed the discussion. Imaging revealed a deep wound across the throat, severe enough to have cut major vessels, the airway, and the esophagus. An amulet was placed within the wound during embalming, perhaps to restore and protect the damaged body. Later imaging also identified injury to the left foot, including loss of the large toe, suggesting more than one attacker or weapon may have been involved. The exact reconstruction remains debated, but the physical evidence strongly indicates violent death. That forensic evidence must be kept separate from the magical accusations. The cut throat is evidence of bodily assault. Wax figures are evidence of what conspirators were accused of preparing. No surviving source demonstrates that a ritual object directly caused the king's injuries or death. The responsible reconstruction is that practical conspiracy, access to the palace, communication among participants, and physical violence determined the outcome. While ritual measures were believed to support the plan by weakening defences or aligning events in the conspirators' favour, Heka may have been part of their strategy, but it did not replace weapons, opportunity, and human action. The conspiracy also shows how difficult it is to separate belief from political psychology. Guards who knew they had been targeted by hostile rites might feel fear or confusion. Conspirators who believed their figures effective might act with greater confidence. Ritual could organize intention, bind participants to a shared plan, and give sacred meaning to rebellion. Yet these possibilities are interpretations rather than direct evidence. Scholars still debate the roles of individuals, the timing of the attack, and whether Ramesses III died immediately or survived briefly. The record is rich, but not complete enough to produce one unchallenged narrative. Ramesses III's body was treated with funerary technologies designed to overcome damage and preserve identity. Embalmers placed protective material within the throat wound and wrapped the king for eternity. The man who could not be saved in life was ritually repaired for the afterlife. Here the contradiction of Heka becomes painfully clear. Knowledge accused of helping open the palace to attack is answered by knowledge used to restore the murdered ruler's body. The force itself is neither loyal nor treacherous. Its meaning depends on alignment, authority, and purpose. The harem conspiracy therefore does not prove that Egyptian magic possessed supernatural power in a testable modern sense. It proves that ritual knowledge mattered enough to appear in a major case of treason, alongside messages, officials, guards, and physical assault. It shows a state that feared not fantasy, but the unauthorized use of a system it had long employed itself. Once the plot was crushed, the king's damaged body passed into another domain where Heka was indispensable. Beyond the courtroom and the palace, the dead required words, images, amulets, and ritual architecture to survive the most dangerous journey of all. Death does not end the need for Heka, it intensifies it. The living body can still breathe, speak, move, and defend itself. But the dead body is silent and vulnerable. It must be preserved against decay, protected from hostile beings, supplied with identity, and given the capacity to act in a realm no ordinary traveller can navigate. Egyptian funerary texts are therefore not passive descriptions of the afterlife. They're instruments designed to transform the dead, restore lost faculties, and make survival possible. Their words, images, and objects form a system in which Heka carries a person across the boundary physical life cannot cross. The earliest large collections appear in the pyramid texts of the late Old Kingdom, carved into the inner chambers of royal pyramids. These utterances help the king ascend, join the gods, avoid danger, and claim breath, movement, and authority. They do not present one continuous story. They are groups of ritual speeches arranged for particular tombs. Some address the dead king directly, others speak in his voice, still others invoke gods, repel enemies, or describe transformation into stars, birds, or divine forms. The walls become a permanent field of speech surrounding the royal body without requiring a living reader nearby. Later, many traditions associated with royal burial appear in the coffin texts, written on coffins and other surfaces for a broader range of elite individuals. These texts expand the afterlife's geography and the techniques needed to move through it. The dead may need names of gates, ferrymen, guardians, paths, and divine beings. Knowledge itself becomes protection. A being who can be named is less able to remain an undefined threat. A passage whose secret name is known can be crossed. The deceased is not merely guided through a fixed landscape, but equipped to negotiate, command, transform, and sometimes challenge those encountered there. The Book of the Dead continues and reshapes this tradition from the New Kingdom onward. The modern title suggests a single book, but no unified volume existed in ancient Egypt. It is a repertoire of roughly 200 known spells, hymns, declarations, transformations, and illustrated compositions from which selections could be made. Individual manuscripts differ greatly. Some are extensive and richly painted, others are shorter or arranged unusually. Owners could be named repeatedly, inserted into formulas, and shown in vignettes. The papyrus was not a universal script followed identically by every soul. It was a personalized collection of tools. Those tools addressed the dead person's practical needs. The deceased must breathe air and drink water. The mouth must open. The heart must remain present and speak appropriately. The body must not be consumed, inverted, decapitated, or deprived of movement. Hostile creatures must be repelled. Gates must open. Divine tribunals must recognize the traveler's legitimacy. The dead may take the forms of a falcon, lotus, heron, swallow, serpent, or god, not as decorative fantasy but as a means of acquiring mobility and power. Heka makes identity flexible without allowing it to dissolve. Images contribute directly to these operations. A vignette can clarify a spell, reinforce it, or perform part of its function through representation. The scene of judgment, in which the heart is weighed against Ma'at, does more than illustrate a theological idea. It places the deceased within a successful ritual outcome. The owner approaches properly, the balance functions, witnesses are present, and the devourer waits without receiving the heart. The desired result is built into the scene. Yet scholars still debate how particular images interacted with recitation and manuscript use, because surviving papyri often come from burials whose full rituals are lost. The treatment of dangerous figures reveals how seriously images were taken. Serpents or hostile beings might be shown restrained, pierced, cut, or placed in positions of defeat. In some context, signs of harmful creatures were mutilated so they could not act against the tomb owner. This practice was selective rather than universal. A serpent could also be protective or divine, depending on identity and context. Egyptian funerary art does not fear images as such. It manages them, ensuring that beneficial figures remain complete while dangerous ones are controlled. Objects placed in the tomb extend the same logic beyond papyrus. Amulets within mummy wrappings protect body parts and provide stability, breath, renewal, or divine assistance. Heart scarabs may carry texts intended to prevent the heart from testifying destructively during judgment. Shabti figures are supplied so that labor required in the next world can be delegated through command. Food, clothing, furniture, models, and ritual equipment establish continuity between earthly life and transformed existence. Not every object is magical in the same way, but many are made effective through inscriptions, placement, and ceremony. 4 so-called magic bricks in some New Kingdom tombs show how protection could be organized spatially. Placed in niches associated with the cardinal directions, the bricks support protective objects such as a figurine, torch, jed pillar, or recumbent jackal. Texts identify the threats each guardian opposes. Together they create a defensive perimeter around the chamber. Mud brick, an ordinary building material, becomes part of a sacred architecture of surveillance. The tomb is not sealed once and forgotten. It is imagined as an active space whose boundaries must remain defended. The body at its center receives equal attention. Mummification preserves form because identity requires a recognizable and inhabitable body. Embalmers treat, wrap, anoint, and protect, while rituals restore sensory capacities. The opening of the mouth ceremony addresses the inability of the dead to speak, breathe, see, hear, and eat. Instruments touch the face and mouth as formulas are recited. Gesture and speech cooperate to return function. The corpse does not simply lie in memory of the person. It is prepared as a transformed body capable of receiving life again. These practices were never available equally. Royal and elite burials preserve the richest evidence, while poorer graves may contain fewer texts and objects or none that survive. Access changed over time, but funerary Heka remained shaped by wealth, literacy, workshops, and local custom. Even expensive papyri contain mistakes or mismatched images, reminders that sacred manuscripts were made by human hands. The evidence remains incomplete, and survival in the archaeological record is not the same as survival in ancient belief. Still, the purpose is unmistakable. Death is treated not as a final silence, but as a condition requiring preparation, knowledge, protection, and transformation. Words on pyramid walls, coffins, and papyri do not merely tell the dead where to go. They give the dead the ability to go anywhere at all. Heka becomes breath inside a sealed chamber, movement inside a wrapped body, and speech inside a mouth that no longer opens by itself. Yet these traditions would change. As Egypt entered Greek, Roman, and later Christian worlds, its ritual languages, divine names, and manuscript practices would be translated, combined, and transformed into new forms. Those new forms did not appear because Egyptian ritual suddenly vanished. They emerged through translation, political change, temple decline, new religious communities, and the continuing need for protection, healing, guidance, and control over uncertainty. By the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, Egypt had become a meeting place of Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and Christian traditions. Languages overlapped. Gods were identified with one another, renamed, reinterpreted, or invoked side by side. Heka continued, but not as an untouched inheritance moving unchanged through 3,000 years. Its vocabulary, institutions, and social settings were transformed. Demotic texts preserve one of the clearest stages of that transformation. Written in the later Egyptian script used for administration, literature, and ritual, they contain procedures for healing, divination, protection, dream inquiry, attraction, separation, and contact with divine or spiritual beings. Some preserve recognizably Egyptian gods and mythic patterns. Others combine Egyptian forms with foreign names, astrological calculations, and techniques circulating across the Eastern Mediterranean. A practitioner might invoke Thoth while drawing on Greek planetary associations or foreign sacred names. The result is a working ritual culture that selects, translates, and adapts without erasing every tradition. The collections commonly called the Greek magical papyri make this world especially vivid. Most survive from Roman Egypt. Though they preserve material of different ages, they include spells, hymns, recipes, invocations, sacred names, and instructions involving lamps, bowls, rings, figurines, incense, plants, animal substances, and written signs. Greek is prominent, but Demotic and Old Coptic passages also appear. Egyptian deities stand beside Greek gods, Jewish divine names, angels, and powers whose origins remain difficult to identify. They show specialists in a multilingual environment where authority could be strengthened by gathering names from several sacred traditions. To modern readers, the long sequences of unfamiliar syllables can look like meaningless sounds. In their ritual setting, they were voces magicae, names or utterances valued precisely because they sounded ancient, secret, foreign, or resistant to ordinary translation. Some may preserve distorted Egyptian words, others draw on Greek, Hebrew, or invented forms. Their obscurity could increase their power because hidden names suggested access to a deeper divine register. Scholars still debate the origins and meanings of many sequences, and it would be misleading to assume that every practitioner understood each component historically. Effectiveness could depend on transmission and reputation as much as etymology. The Egyptian concern with true names survives, but in altered form. A ritual handbook might provide many names for one power, each adapted to a specific purpose. Letters, symbols, and drawings could be written on papyrus, linen, metal, pottery, or the body. A spell might require exact timing according to the sun, moon, or planets. Another could instruct the practitioner to prepare ink from particular ingredients, face a certain direction, wear a ring, or speak into a lamp flame. The materials remain familiar, but the ritual universe expands. Heka is no longer expressed only through pharaonic temple language. It moves through cosmopolitan cities, private workshops, households, and communities living under imperial rule. Temples remained important, and Egyptian priestly knowledge did not disappear immediately with Greek or Roman conquest. Priests continued to copy hieroglyphic and demotic texts, perform ritual, interpret dreams, and preserve specialized learning. Yet the institutional world supporting them gradually weakened. Political reorganization and Christianity changed the position of traditional cults. Temples closed at different times rather than in one sudden collapse. Some specialists adapted their knowledge to new patrons and languages, others vanished from the record. The evidence remains incomplete because texts survive more readily than careers and local relationships. Christianization brought profound change, But it did not end the human needs that ritual texts addressed. Coptic, the final phase of Egyptian written largely with Greek letters, became the medium for prayers, theology, legal documents, and magical formularies. Coptic ritual manuscripts invoke Christ, angels, saints, biblical figures, and divine names while also preserving methods recognizable from earlier Egyptian and Mediterranean practice. They offer protection, healing, reconciliation, divination, and solutions to conflict. A person could seek help for illness, uncertainty, hostile relationships, travel, or unseen attack within a Christian sacred universe. Continuity is real, but so is transformation. Isis may no longer stand at the center of a healing narrative, yet the use of authoritative sacred precedent remains. A practitioner may invoke biblical events instead of the childhood of a Horus. Angels replace or absorb roles once assigned to older gods. Crosses, Christian formulas, and scriptural names appear beside elaborate signs and inherited ritual structures. Water can still be blessed and applied. Written words can still be worn, dissolved, buried, or attached. Names still carry authority. Matter still receives speech. The grammar of ritual action persists even when the theology changes. Recent work on Coptic magical manuscripts has made this world far more visible. Many texts were scattered through museum collections, poorly published, or known only to specialists. New editions and digital projects now compare handwriting, language, materials, formulas, and manuscript relationships across hundreds of objects. The Kyprianos database and the corpus of Coptic magical formularies treat these sources not as embarrassing survivals at the edge of religion, but as evidence for everyday crisis management. They reveal people seeking practical answers within Christian societies that officially distinguished prayer from condemned magic. Though lived experience remained more complicated, that distinction mattered. Church authorities would denounce certain rites, books, diviners, or practitioners, especially when rituals attempted coercion, erotic control, spirit invocation, or private power outside sanctioned channels. Even so, the boundary between prayer, blessing, healing, amulet, and magic was unstable. A text might invoke orthodox names while using procedures criticized by clergy. A practitioner might see no contradiction between Christian faith and a written charm. As in earlier Egypt, legitimacy depended on who performed the act, which powers were invoked, and whether the purpose appeared protective or threatening. One Coptic papyrus preserves a procedure intended to improve the voice, with instructions concerning ink, signs, and a vessel. The goal is modest, almost domestic, yet the method gathers sacred language and material preparation around it. Such manuscripts remind us that ritual was not confined to grand crises. People wanted confidence, favor, relief, attraction, protection, and success in ordinary life. Their concerns changed less than the names through which help was sought. Across these centuries, a Heka does not survive as one unchanged doctrine moving intact from pyramids to Christian manuscripts. It survives as a deep habit of thought words can act, names can connect, images can embody, materials can carry force, and sacred precedent can be applied to the present. Each age rewrites that habit in its own language. Egyptian gods become companions to Greek powers, then yield to angels and saints. Temple libraries give way to private formularies and dispersed manuscripts. Yet the old question remains beneath every transformation. When human beings face danger, illness, conflict, or uncertainty. What can they do to make the unseen world answer? The question beneath every transformation is not whether ancient Egyptians possess supernatural powers that can be demonstrated today. The surviving texts and objects cannot prove that a spoken formula altered venom, that a wax figure weakened a guard, or that an amulet forced the dead safely through the afterlife. What they prove is more historically valuable people built a vast, disciplined system for acting upon uncertainty. Heka gave form to the conviction that sickness, danger, injustice, political threat, and death should not be met with passivity. A person could speak, write, bind, wash, anoint, carve, bury, burn, remember, and invoke. Each action placed fear inside an intelligible order and gave human hands something meaningful to do. That system is now reconstructed from an uneven archive. Monumental inscriptions survive because stone survives. Funerary papyri survive because dry tombs protected them. Temple libraries, elite burials, royal courts, and literate specialists dominate the record because they possessed the resources to create durable texts and objects, everyday oral formulas, inexpensive charms, local healers, household knowledge, and practices carried by people who left few inscriptions are much harder to recover. A papyrus found in a museum drawer may preserve a world of use, teaching, correction, and recitation that the object alone cannot reveal. The evidence remains incomplete, and the silence around ordinary practitioners must not be mistaken for their absence. Modern databases and publication projects are beginning to change what can be seen. The Kyprianos database brings together Greek, Demotic, and Coptic ritual texts and objects that were once scattered across catalogues, storerooms, and specialized editions. New digital photography allows damaged fibers, faded ink, erased signs, and reused writing surfaces to be examined with greater precision. The corpus of Coptic magical formularies compares manuscripts not merely as isolated curiosities, but as parts of traditions copied, adapted, and circulated between communities. Recent editions of Coptic magical papyri reveal scribes who borrowed from Christian scripture, angelic names, older Egyptian techniques, Greek ritual language, and local practical knowledge. These projects do not uncover a single secret doctrine. They expose networks of transformation. The same caution applies to the renewed museum interest in Heka. Exhibitions can place amulets, medical papyri, stelae, wands, figurines, and funerary objects beside one another, allowing visitors to see connections that conventional categories often separate. Yet display cases also create their own illusion. An amulet appears silent and complete, detached from the body that wore it, the words spoken over it, and the household anxiety that gave it purpose. A wax figure may look sinister after its text and ritual sequence have been lost. A medical papyrus can seem like a book of strange recipes rather than a working tool used by trained hands. The task is to return movement, speech, touch, and circumstance to objects that museums preserve in stillness. This is also where modern occult images of Egypt must be separated from the historical record. Later European traditions transformed Egypt into a source of hidden wisdom, secret initiation, alchemy, astrology, ceremonial magic, and imagined priestly mysteries. Popular culture added cursed tombs, omnipotent spells, revived mummies, and priests who command impossible forces. These inventions have their own cultural history, but they are not transparent survivals of pharaonic Heka. Ancient Egyptian ritual was not one secret code waiting to be rediscovered. It changed across regions and centuries, depended on language and institution, and was embedded in practical concerns as ordinary as pain, sleep, childbirth, professional success, legal conflict, and fear of death. Nor should historical correction drain the subject of wonder. The reality is more compelling than the fantasy because it reveals a civilization thinking with extraordinary consistency across word, image, body, and material. Egyptians treated a name as part of identity, a picture as a potential presence, a story as a pattern that could be reopened, and an object as a place where power might remain. A healer could observe a wound carefully and still invoke Isis. A state could organize armies and still break enemy figurines. Embalmers could repair a murdered king with practical skill while placing an amulet inside the wound. These combinations are not failures to distinguish reality from imagination. They are evidence of a different theory of reality. That theory was never static. Heka could support royal authority, domestic care, medicine, funerary transformation, and hostile action. It could be represented as a god, described as a primordial force, embedded in temple ritual, or carried through a small knot. Its legitimacy depended on purpose and authorization. The same wax used to destroy an image of chaos became criminal when conspirators allegedly aimed it at palace guards. The same commanding speech that protected a patient could threaten an enemy. Heka therefore exposes the moral ambiguity of power itself. A force capable of restoring order can also be claimed by competing visions of what order should be. The historical legacy of Heka lies in this record of human response. It shows people refusing to divide suffering into isolated categories. Illness could require medicine, social support, divine appeal, material treatment, and authoritative words at once. Death could require preservation of the body, protection of the name, ritual knowledge, and carefully placed objects. Political danger could be answered through soldiers, courts, inscriptions, and ceremonies of defeat. No single explanation fully accounts for why particular individuals recovered, why a conspiracy succeeded, or why one manuscript was copied while another disappeared. Yet the practices reveal how Egyptians organized action when certainty was unavailable. They also reveal the importance of memory. A god's earlier victory could be brought into the present because it had been preserved in speech and writing. A dead person could continue because the name remained readable. A ritual could be repeated centuries later because a scribe copied instructions onto fresh papyrus. Even transformation depended on continuity. Greek, demotic, and Coptic practitioners changed the divine names and theological frameworks, but they inherited the belief that sacred language could enter matter and redirect events. Heka endured not as an untouched substance, but as a habit of making memory operational. There is a final restraint that historical honesty requires. The sources tell us what practitioners prescribed, what institutions approved, and what objects were prepared, but rarely what participants privately believed. One patient may have trusted the divine words completely, another may have valued the medicine, the healer's confidence, or family presence more than the theology. Rituals can be shared without being interpreted identically. Ancient Egyptians were not a single mind. Their society contained skepticism, devotion, habit, fear, expertise, disagreement, and change. Heka was powerful partly because it could gather those different experiences into coordinated action, without demanding that every person explain the action in exactly the same way. The oil lamp from the first room has burned low. The patient, the practitioner, and the original words are gone. Perhaps the remedy helped. Perhaps the illness passed for reasons no one understood. Perhaps nothing changed except that fear was given structure and the sufferer was not left alone before uncertainty. The papyrus might later have been copied, discarded, buried, or torn for reuse. The amulet might have remained against the body until its cord broke. Most such moments vanished without leaving a name. What remains is a civilization's long conversation with forces it could not fully control. The Egyptians watched the sun disappear and trusted it would return. They watched the Nile rise and fall, bodies heal and fail, kings triumph and die, names endure and erode. Between those rhythms they placed words, images, knots, medicines, and stories. Heka was the bridge they imagined between intention and consequence, between the visible hand and the hidden order beyond it. Now the temple doors are still, and the voices in the house of life have faded. Sand lies where specialists once prepared ink and opened scrolls. Museum glass surrounds objects once warmed by skin, water, breath, and touch. Yet the human need inside them remains familiar. In every age, people search for ways to act when knowledge ends, to protect what can be lost, and to make suffering answerable to meaning. Long after the final syllable fades, the water remains still for a moment, reflecting the lamp and the hand withdrawing from the bowl. Then the surface settles. Nothing in the room announces whether the universe has listened. There is only care completed as carefully as knowledge allows, and the passage of time. That uncertainty belongs to the ancient room, but also to us. We preserve fragments, translate damaged lines, and try to hear intentions across immense distance, knowing every reconstruction leaves something beyond reach. The missing part is not an empty failure. It is the darkness around the lamp, giving the surviving flame its shape. The last image is small. A lamp trembles beside a bowl of water, a knot rests tight around a thread. Black signs wait on papyrus, their speaker long forgotten. Outside, the river moves through darkness as it has for thousands of years. The words are no longer heard, but the hope within them survives that chaos is not absolute, that memory can resist disappearance, and that even a fragile human voice may leave a trace in the night.